nice. Well, that got recorded live. Hey, everybody.
Greetings.
We're going to edit that on the YouTube. Fix it in post.
Fix it in post.
Yeah. All right. Me. Hello and welcome to this episode of Superhero Ethics. I'm happy to say that this is Matthew Fox, and I'm here with our regular co-host. Well, there's nothing regular about them, but still a co-host on a recurring basis, Paul Christopher Hoppy. Paul, how are we doing today?
Doing pretty good, yeah. It sounded like there was like a spaceship outside my window about 3 minutes before we started recording, and fortunately they seem to have returned to their home planet, although you said that might actually be Minnesota. So
yeah, we're talking about some pretty heavy-duty lawn mowing that was been happening. It stopped with Paul and then immediately started outside my house, which is interesting because, to be clear, we live more than 1,000 miles apart from each other. Happily, mine I think is far enough away that it's not coming through the mic, where I can fix it in post. But we'll see. But let's
fix it in post.
Fix it in post. Let's jump right into our topic. And as we mentioned, Paul's a professional poker player. I'm learning to be one, or at least a highly skilled amateur. And so we're going to be using poker a lot, but still talking about superheroes and talking about like the way that a lot of these concepts and philosophical ideas can affect how we look at the stories we love and can affect how we look at our own lives. And so, Paul, I'm going to give you 3 examples. And I want you to tell me if there's some sort of unifying factor between the 3. When Thanos says that, like, he cites the cost and how much he has paid and how much he has lost as a reason why he can't stop, why he has to live, fulfill his plan of the snapping. When I talked to you at length in high school and college and after college and for most of my 20s and 30s about how, okay, yes, the relationship I'm in is incredibly toxic, but I spent so much time in the relationship. And if I end it now, instead of ending it back when everyone told me I should have 6 months ago, well, I mean, I've spent so much time in it. I can't just end it now.
It would have all been for nothing.
And the last one, and this is, of course, purely hypothetical, no connection to our own world, but a president starts a war that everyone tells them they shouldn't start. The president is convinced they can win this war, even though everyone tells them they probably can't. Now, months and months later, when they said the war could only be over in, hypothetically, let's say a couple of weeks, and everyone is now telling them, look, see, the war can't be won, but they have to keep fighting the war because, on some level, like they don't want to admit, like, all this waste that they've put in, all the costs that have been for nothing. And so they start using those costs to say, but look at how much we've spent. Look at all the lives that have been lost. We have to win. What do those 3 situations have in common?
Yeah, I know the last one wasn't about Vietnam, but it sounded like a shorter time frame of this. It's like
it was funny. I did write it in with some thought of current events, but as I was writing it, I was like, "Oh, this is Vietnam. Oh, this is this is an awful lot of
the history of the world." Because humans have some cognitive issues. This is
honestly, it might even be a war long ago in myth where someone says, you know what, we've got to break all the rules of war because we spent 10 years on this beach, and now we'll be reviewing that movie pretty soon. But
right.
Anyway.
Yeah,
what do all these things have in common?
Pyrrhic victory. So they're all examples of the sunk cost fallacy, wherein one uses one's previous investments in order to justify decisions made in the present, rather than adjusting to the current reality, looking at things through a fresh lens and trying to make the best decisions from that point forward.
Right.
And in poker, we have a simple saying to kind of remind people not to fall victim to the sunk cost fallacy, which is don't throw good money after the bad.
Yeah,
basically, where, okay, maybe you made a bad investment before, but making another bad investment isn't gonna justify that previous investment. And maybe it was even a good investment and it just didn't go well.
Right.
And then now you have to adjust, you have to update to your new circumstances.
Well,
and people don't.
I totally get what you mean, that you heard that from poker. I don't think, like the sunk cost fallacy, it certainly does not come from that. It primarily, as I understand, it comes from economics, and that's certainly where I first heard it in microeconomics courses. Was talking about
throw good money after the bad, specifically that.
Okay. Yeah, in terms of investments, as kind of like a precept for business school type things of like,
Yeah.
you spent this much money on an investment. It's not, at some point you cut losses. You say, new Coke is just not going to work out. And
Yeah. Yeah.
we're not going to keep spending money on it.
Yeah. I'd just like to challenge one thing. I don't think
Mhm.
it definitely didn't come from poker and definitely came from economics first. I think there
Okay.
are a lot of things in economics that did come from poker and I'm sure
Yeah.
vice versa. But I have a friend who was in, I don't know, doing some kind of economics thing in college, and
Uh-huh.
their teacher would have them go play poker to like demonstrate
Yeah.
certain concepts. So there's definitely a very clear parallel there.
Oh, for sure. For sure. And I think that, and that's part of why we're using it in this podcast a lot, is because it is such a kind of microcosm of decision making and risk and prior cost as opposed to current cost and things like that. I did a little research on this, so just kind of give us some fun background. The sunk cost fallacy was a term coined in 1980 by behavioral economist Richard Thaler. It may well be that he's heard it from other people. He could have heard it at a poker table or a craps table. I don't know. He certainly published it first. And just giving a little more of the technical definition, at least in the world of psychology and things like that, where a lot of it's now studied. And this comes from a really interesting paper I read as part of this, Loss Aversion as a Potential Factor in the Sunk Cost Fallacy, in the International Journal of Psychological Research by Veronica Tare and Harold L. Miller. And they wrote, the sunk cost fallacy relates to a greater tendency to continue endeavor when an investment in time, effort, or money has been made. Doing so is considered an error because a rational decision maker should only consider current marginal costs and benefits and should neglect sunk cost because it is irretrievable no matter what option is chosen. This phenomenon can occur in humans and non-human animals. Not sure how they tested it in non-human animals, but I did not get a chance to dig further into that. But it's an interesting idea to see if like maybe this is something that is kind of just a deep biology thing.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to dig too deep into animal testing, but just like if we came up with a hypothetical, like a bunch of beavers building a dam, and it's like not going well, and it kind of demonstrates that maybe that's not a good place to build the dam, and like you should go to another place. I don't really know that much about dam building or beavers for that matter, but like often there is a tendency to, well, this is where we started doing the thing, so we're just going to keep doing the thing here because obviously this is where we've made our progress, so we should keep going, when in fact sometimes the lack of progress should teach us like, we need to make an adjustment, we need to move somewhere else. And I could certainly see how non-human animals might do that in observable ways that don't need to be like under lab conditions or whatever. And but that is interesting.
Hopefully not. So let's talk about why it happens, because it is interesting to me that a lot of the study of it comes out of psychology, and I think it at first I was like, wait, really? But then I was like, no, actually this makes a lot of sense because it's kind of a psychological factor.
I mean, completely, right? It's to me it's like, I mean, you mentioned loss aversion, or you mentioned that they mentioned loss aversion, right? And to give a poker example, someone's playing poker all night, it's wee hours of the morning, and like they know they should go home, but they're losing, and like they don't want to book the loss, right? They want to just get even, they want to make it back, and like then if they make it back and cash out a $3 win, they're like, I won. And it's like, you spent 20 hours like winning $3, and when you were losing however much, it's like there's this feeling of like, well, losing 200 or 2,000, whatever, what's the difference, maybe, but like the difference between winning 3 and losing 3, it's like, whoa, this is a categorical binary difference. And so it's one of the things I really enjoy about poker and talking about poker is it often takes things that apply in so many circumstances and it lays them bare in a really kind of obvious in your face fashion. Whereas, you mentioned like relationships earlier, and, it doesn't have to be romantic relationships. It can be friendships. It can be business
jobs,
arrangements, a job. Exactly. Like, oh, well, I've worked here for so long, and, I'll get promoted eventually. And if I go to another job, I'll be further away from that. But, and like sometimes there's some validity there, right? But the validity in that case wouldn't be, well, I've put in this work, so it would necessarily be a waste. It would be like, I've put in this work and actually made some progress towards a goal that I still want and am likely to achieve. Whereas the fallacy would be, I've put in that work, therefore I shouldn't evaluate another opportunity. Like if you have a career track where you're like 3 years in and you're like 2 years away from a promotion to something that is what you want, like you should still observe if there's another place where it's like, oh, if I go there, I'll actually only be 1 year away because they have like a faster track or whatever. I know as little about these types of things as I do about building dams.
No, but I think you actually captured it perfectly, and about how both poker is a great illustration of how this works in theory, and also a good illustration of why it is a lot harder to deal with outside of something like poker. Because in poker, you do actually know the odds, and you do know if I've spent money on, the first, couple of steps of a poker hand, and now I face a new bet, and the fifth card that has come tells me that I just do not have a chance of winning this hand. All the money that I've put in that pot does not change that.
Right.
Like, and I can categorically know that, or I can categorically know, yes, I've put 50 in the pot, but now I'm being asked to put 200 when I don't have anything like the chance to win this pot that I think I would need to win. Yeah, there's still some guesswork involved, but you can pretty accurately decide, like, what are those odds and do they stack up against each other? All of my friends can look at me and go, Matthew, you have all these toxic traits. Your partner has all these toxic traits. You're not going to fix this. And you're probably right. Certainly a lot of the time you were right, but not always. You can look at, like, we're going to talk about how this applies in sports all the time. And, like, at what point there's a sunk cost fallacies for the players and the coaches and the managers, and also for the fans, but also just like for the, you look at a team that's going nowhere in the middle of the season, and you start saying, like, okay, so should we start selling off because, or you say, like, oh, we've paid these players so much, we got to keep giving them a chance and give them a chance. There are times where the players all of a sudden remember they're really good 2/3 of the way through the season and start winning like crazy, and you don't expect it. And, like, so my point only being that I think one of the things that makes sunk cost fallacy so interesting is the line of what is sunk cost versus not is a lot clearer at a poker table or even other kind of, like, numerically definable things than it is in a lot of other life, which doesn't mean it's not relevant. It just means that it's a much harder conversation.
Yeah. I mean, I think I agree with the gist of what you're saying. I think in poker, it's not necessarily that easy to know what your next action should be, right? But what the thing is, it's not that easy in the first place. And then when you have this emotional attachment to the investments you've already made, that makes it harder, right? That clouds the judgment. And what you really need to do is be able to look at it dispassionately and be like, is this next investment a good one, regardless of whether the prior investments were good ones? Like right here where I am, based on whatever's happened, like, is this a good idea to invest further? Yes or no? And those are things that you can't calculate them perfectly because poker is a game of imperfect information where you don't know the other person's cards, right? But you can use math and you can enumerate them, right? You can put them into numbers. You can say, these are my assumptions. Given my assumptions, these are the cold hard facts about whether or not this would be a good investment. Right. And so if you make good assumptions, then you should be able to come to good conclusions. I totally agree that in everything else, it's much more difficult to, what it is it's harder to evaluate the value, right? Yeah. Because it's like, well, if this is like your dream person that, like, just kind of, there are certain issues in terms of how you get along or whatever, your payoff, like, if things work out, is enormous, right? It could be like, extreme happiness. It could be fulfillment. It could be like, this is, exactly what I've wanted all my life, is to meet the person I most want to spend most of my time with and whatever. And so evaluating that payoff is not like there's $150 in the pot, right? Like in poker, it's like, this is how much I will win if I do this. Right. Whereas in most things in life, it's more, you have to put your own value on it, right?
Yeah.
But again, still, you've got whatever the value is that you think that isn't necessarily enumerable, and then you've got to kind of figure out the odds of that happening, right? And then, but if you have all this investment prior, then it can just make it so much harder to, you know, passionately evaluate that, I guess, you know, to like basically figure out like
You froze on me. This is not good. Let's find out. So you froze on me right after said to passionately
did the audio froze?
Yeah, so the last thing I heard you say to passionately embrace.
Oh, okay. Yeah. I mean, it should be recording here, I think, but
okay.
Yeah, I basically just went on a thing about that I think shouldn't be too.
Okay. I'll figure out how to edit it. Well, and I totally hear you. And so let's start talking about some of that psychology that goes into why this happens and where the loss aversion comes from. And I think that there's an element of like, let me back up a second. And so let's start talking about why this happens, why so many people can fall into the sunk cost fallacy, myself very much included. And I think a lot of it is psychology, and we'll get to that. But I think a part of it, which is very psychologically tinged, but also is not always accurate, is the way that our brains work and often misunderstand variance. And this is obviously a topic we're going to be talking about a lot. But you know, there's a phrase that's often used in gambling, but that also can be transferred to so many other things, which is that dice have no memory. And it's that idea of, you know, well, let's say that there is a, you know, whatever the chance is of rolling a 7 when you roll 2 die, you know, it's higher than any other number, but it's still less than 50%. But you know, in games where that matters, like craps and stuff like that, a lot of people will think that every time you roll and don't get a 7, that means that the chances that a 7 is going to come are getting higher and higher.
Well, it's due, Matthew. It's due.
Right, it's due. And that, like, well, if a 7 is, I'm totally making up this number, but if 7 is supposed to come 1 every 3 times, and you've rolled it 4 times, and it hasn't come up, it's now much more likely, you know? And in a small sample size, that makes no sense. If you've rolled it 20 times and a 7 hasn't come up, the dice might be loaded, and you got to check that, you know, or maybe it's 200 times before you.
It's a large number. It's a large number, but yeah.
But my point is that assuming a basic system, and I think that in the same way, like that at least is numerically provable in a way.
Mm-hmm.
That, you know, each die roll is not relevant, you know, and that every time you have a flush draw, if you missed the last couple, by no means does it make it more likely or less likely that it's going to hit the next time. And in the same way, I think people can start to think those kind of thoughts about themselves in terms of like, okay, well, the last 2 people cheated on me, so this one probably will, so I have to be super aware of anything that looks possible. Or the flip side of my last 2 bosses were terrible to me, of course this one won't be. I'm not going to look at these danger signs, you know? And so I think that, to me, there's 2 parts here. One part is the misunderstanding of trends and yes, like in the same way that you might say, like, yes, the last 2 times you missed a flush, you missing a flush this time isn't actually connected to those 2. But if you missed 5 flushes in a row, it might be sometimes you're looking at a spade and a club and thinking they're 2 spades. Like you might be misevaluating the situation somehow.
Mm-hmm.
In that same way of like, oh my gosh, why do I keep dating toxic people? Why is my luck so bad?
Right.
Well, let's look at the
maybe you're drawn to toxic people. Maybe you're making really bad wagers. Yeah.
But the point being that there is some sense of, I think, like just misunderstanding, you know, that goes into sunk cost fallacy, is that, you know, there are lots of reasons why we want to psychologically believe in this, but and we'll get into that in a second, but that like most of the time we are able to trick ourselves into thinking, or I won't say we, because you might be immune to this, but those of us who fall for it, like it's hard to you never say, okay, I know there's a sunk cost. It's you convince yourself it's not sunk cost, that cost you paid is relevant somehow.
Right, like it's a live investment, right? Like,
Right.
well, I invested in this, so this is my investment.
Right.
When it's just history at that point. Yeah,
Right.
and I think that's what it is. I think a big part of it is having that emotional investment, that emotional connection to the work you've put in, the money you've put in,
Mhm.
the emotions that you've gone through, and sort of wanting, whenever whatever it is ends, to not have the regret of feeling like it wasn't worth it, right?
Yeah.
To try to reach that payoff um of where it feels like, okay, well, I didn't do well, but at least I won this much back. Or like,
Yeah.
well, that relationship wasn't perfect, but at least, I ended it on my terms after, we had a certain amount of good time, or whatever it is, um, and I think the sort of regret of like booking the loss, essentially, I think
Yeah.
is it's a difficult thing for people to come to terms with. And I wouldn't say I'm immune to it by any means. I would say I'm less susceptible to it than the average
Mhm.
person, because I've been working on that my whole life, kind of,
Yeah.
right? I mean, like playing poker forces you to confront that on a, on a sometimes on a daily basis, or,
Yeah.
where, well, definitely on a daily basis, just on a hand to hand, like, okay, in this hand, I've put in some money. That money's not mine anymore. It's in the middle, right? That's
Yeah.
the history of what's happened. And now I have to make this decision on its own. And I mean, I've heard people say things like, oh, well, if you've called the turn, like, you have to call the river. And I'm like, what are you talking about?
Yeah.
And, there are spots against individual opponents and certain runouts where, like, yeah, that's going to end up being true. But that's because you've made that decision on its own, not
Yeah.
because, you know, um,
Well,
also, if you think that, 4 consecutive non-sevens in a row are particularly unlucky, and you think it's like 1 in 3, it's probably because it's 1 in 6. And that's just a good example of, like, people just don't intuitively know odds, right? It's
right.
not, it's like it takes math, it takes thinking about it, and I don't know the odds, but I kind of just did them right now, because there's like
Yeah.
6 ways to make 7, and there's 36 ways to combine 2, so 6 over 36 is 1/6. But like, um tell me if that's wrong. But
Yeah.
but yeah, the point being that, just like that whole, like, oh, I'm due, or the attachment, like, there's so many ways to go wrong,
Yeah.
right? Like you've named a bunch of different kind of biases that are all connected here, and they all kind of just add up to, it's difficult to just kind of put the past in the past and say, okay, where I am right now, evaluating the situation, and then now pick the path forward.
Yeah. No, I think it's really true. And like earlier, you mentioned like the poker player. You were very kind to talk about a hypothetical poker player who gets so excited because they stayed an extra 2 hours to win an extra $1.50. That's very much me. I very much told Paul those stories of, I won. I came out winning 10 cents an hour. And that's a thing where, and this is almost kind of skipping ahead a little bit, so I'll be careful. But I wanted to kind of, I think it's a good way to explain the feeling of it, is that I think poker is a good example, because we talked in a previous episode about how poker, that gambling is almost more of a kind of entertainment, whereas like you can also play something at like poker specifically where your goal is to win, and your goal is to win money, and perhaps for literally for profit, or because you want to have like the mental satisfaction of winning, or whatever it is. Gambling is more about the thrill, and is more about the accomplishment and stuff like that. And I think that was, when I'm feeling like that, it is very much that gambler's mindset of, because it does feel amazing to go home knowing that I was $200. Like, winning $200 does not feel quite as good as being $197 down, winning $200 and coming out $3 ahead.
Yeah.
Now, but the thing is that what I'm then able to do is to realize, like, okay, this is, why am I evaluating it that way? And then if I want to actually make money at poker, instead of just getting the gambler's high, I need to stop thinking like that.
Yeah.
But the other thing that really also helped me with that is And this I think is another thing that goes into it, is that you don't often look at all the costs, because I would say to myself, okay, it's 11 o'clock at night. I could leave the casino and go back to my hotel room if I'm in like Vegas, or just, go back home, or I could stay 3 more hours to win those $3.
Right.
Well, in terms of the money on the table, I have won money back. I don't consider a cost what a zombie I feel like, because I got 3 hours less sleep that night than I should have, because I went home at 2 a.m. instead of 11 o'clock, like a smart person.
Yeah.
But I think actually that's also another good way to get deeper into this idea of loss and the aversion to it, because I do think that a big part of it, not all by any means, but a big part of it is the fear of judgment from others. The fear of the "I told you so's." And in something like poker, I think a lot of poker players, especially when you're doing it for fun, or especially when I am talking to people who don't play poker as often, they'll say, "Oh, you went and played poker last night. How did you do?"
Right. Yeah.
And in my head, I kind of know that on some level they're evaluating, is this person a degenerate gambler? They claim that poker is,
or that they might be,
or they might be fooling themselves.
No. I mean, you said in my head, I know that they're thinking this.
Oh yeah. Okay. Yeah. No, that they might be, exactly. And the psychology again of like, well, everyone's against me. I'm all paranoid,
Right.
I've commented before that depression is incredibly egotistical, and that you assume everyone's always thinking about you all the time.
Right.
But the same thing of like, when I try to give advice to people who are in bad relationships and stuff like that, I was talking with someone just a couple of weeks ago about, they're finally deciding to end a marriage that I think a lot of people in their life have realized like was toxic for some time. And I say that in a very judgmental way. I don't make, we're all outsiders, but they said that one of the reasons why it's hard for them is that they know their mother is gonna be pretty terrible to them and say, "I told you should have never married that bum,"
Right.
and that fear of judgment, and that fear of, I told everyone I could make this work, and so what's going to happen now if I can't do that? And pulling it back to the stuff in the title of our podcast, I think that's exactly why Tony can't let go of Ultron.
Yeah,
because everyone judges him. Everyone says, "Tony, you're out of control. You're doing all these crazy things." He basically says that to Banner. Like, he doesn't want to be judged. He starts to realize there might be a problem with Ultron. And instead of going to the Avengers and saying like, "Guys, I screwed up. I need your help fixing it," he's like, "No, I don't want to tell them about this until I can tell them it worked out," because he doesn't want Cap to win. He's been in his battle with Cap over who's right or who's wrong. In some level, in a real battle, in some level, Tony is still trying to get his father to say that Tony is better than,
Right.
The point is, there's so many factors that go into it, but it's that fear of outside judgment that's a part of it.
Yeah. And I mean, I think there's the fear of outside judgment, and sometimes there's the reality of having to listen to somebody talk about I have a poker story. This guy I used to play with had a tendency to win a big hand or whatever, and then you'd hear about it for like 3 days, right?
Yeah.
Just like narrate the hand to people over and over and over. And this other guy gets in a pot with him, and it's like early on in the hand, and the guy like makes a bet or whatever, and he's just like, "I'm just gonna fold because I don't want to have to listen to you talk about winning this hand for like 3 days. Like if it becomes some big pot or something." He's like,
Right.
"I just don't want to hear you tell this story tomorrow," and the marriage situation you're talking about, like that person, it's probably not just a fear of like their mom like saying "I told you so" and whatever. It could be the reality of like they're going to hear about this, right? And like not wanting to be like, "Yeah, you were right," or whatever. And like here's the thing that actually makes it frustrating for me in these types of things. Like maybe they weren't right?
Yeah.
Just because something doesn't work out doesn't mean it was the wrong decision at the time.
Right.
And people saying "I told you so" doesn't mean that they knew, right? It doesn't mean that, it's like you're watching a baseball game or whatever, and you're like, "Oh, I knew this team was going to win." You didn't know anything, Like the outcome was not predetermined. That's not how things work, right? I mean, I guess you can have a view of reality where that's true, but like the idea that you actually have knowledge of the future, it's like, okay, enjoy your sports betting then. I guess you're going to be super rich soon,
Yeah.
right? And so I think, there's a combination of, what you were talking about, the fear of being judged, that like maybe people are thinking these things,
Mhm.
right? And that's a reason that I like rarely talk about poker results with people. Like if somebody's like, oh, how was last night? Oh, it was great. I might have won 1,000, I might have lost 1,000, I might have the same answer because it was a good game, I enjoyed myself, and I felt like I played well,
Right.
and then it was a good night. And sometimes I could be like, oh, it was, there might be stories or something, but any given thing, it's like something like poker, like breaking it down to just what the numerical outcome was,
Right.
like that person's marriage, like there could be toxic aspects, but that doesn't mean that there weren't positive things along the way as well.
Yeah.
Right. And it sounds to me, not knowing anything about the exact situation, that eventually this person came to terms with weighing whatever positives there were with whatever negatives and deciding that, okay, reevaluating the situation right now, this is what I have to do. This is what's best for me. This is the way to proceed. Right. And I think sometimes there is this, like, not just the judgment of others, but kind of our own perceptions of our previous actions, right? Where making a certain decision now is basically saying, hey, I made a bad decision before, and kind of an unwillingness to accept that, or a difficulty with accepting that. Whereas like a lot of decisions we can make now can be based on, we have more information than we had before. Therefore, that wasn't a bad decision based on the information we had at the time. So, I mean, it can be both. It can be either, right? It can sometimes like, no, it was a terrible decision and you got it wrong, and that's okay. And now you have to make a better decision to move forward.
At some point we're going to talk about results-oriented thinking and how problematic that can be in poker and superheroes in life. And I think this is an outshoot of it, that with a consideration is not only just like, are you going to evaluate your actions based on what the results were, but how are other people going to do that? And what's the larger story it tells you about yourself, because I think certainly for myself, as someone who's gone through depression in very bad ways and other kind of mental challenges like that, like when the narrative in your head is so negative, it begins to become very difficult to try anything, because there's that voice. It could be an outside person who's treating you terribly, like emotional abuse, and it could be internal, and often the two go hand in hand, and like the one creates the other. The external creates the internal. If the internal is creating the external, then that's a different set of psychological challenges. But I don't want to make fun of that. I mean, that certainly happens as well. But my point being that, like, now you stop trying to do things because you don't want to risk anything. And that's I think one of the reasons that I find the sunken cost fallacy so fascinating is that it's not like an easy thing where you say, oh, okay, just avoid sunken cost, because the line you want to walk is a pretty narrow one between trying to avoid sunken cost stuff, but also being willing to say, yeah, it didn't work yet, but I still believe in this idea, so I'm not going to give up because 1 month of baseball results, or one fight against this villain or whatever didn't work. That I want to keep trying. I want to keep seeing what I can do. And
or Ultron turned into a murder bot, but maybe I'll make Vision, who will be like pretty cool.
Yeah. I mean, in some ways, that's one of the weirdest ones, and I think one of the things a lot of people have with that movie, but also it doesn't fit a perfect narrative, but it's true,
Yeah. And I mean, there is something different, right, with Vision than with Ultron, but I remember seeing that movie and like, I thought it was fine, and I think I liked it more than most did at the time. And I remember you talking about how it's like, well, they try it once, it doesn't, and does this, and then he tries it again, and then it works, and whatever. And that was kind of like frustrating in a narrative sense, right? And I do think you make a really interesting point about the kind of, Tony not wanting that judgment from Cap and whoever else. And wanting to just like, I'll just do the thing and it'll work out, and then they'll see that I was right, kind of, right?
Right.
And like making vision is maybe kind of like a sunken cost fallacy, but like also maybe it's like he believes in his vision and like and he's just like, I'm just going to try it again till I get it right. I mean, that's what inventors do, right? Like it's not like, oh, light bulb didn't work, we'll give up. It's like, no, I'll keep getting 1,000 people to try 10,000 different things, and then I'll claim credit for it. Like that's how you do it, right?
Yeah. No, I and I think kind of what you're referencing there is also Edison had that great line of like, someone's like, but you haven't discovered anything. Yes, he did. I discovered like 1,000 different things that don't work as filaments.
Exactly.
As you said, there was some shady things happening. I discovered it, but still, yeah, same point involves.
Yeah, and I think it's I have no idea what I was going to say, so why don't you say what you were going to say?
Sounds good. Well, I think another thing that goes in there is and this kind of connects to what we were just saying about like when it's internal judgment, but also when we talk about the actual cost, the actual price that's being paid.
Yeah.
And one thing they talk about in that paper is that oddly, the higher the cost, the more likely it is that you're going to fall into sunk cost fallacy.
Yeah, sure.
And I think part of it's because that like there's that like I can't go back. In poker at least you can always fold and go to the next hand.
Yeah.
If at 25 it's easy to be like, well, I can just break up with this person and start again. At 50, that's a lot harder. Like, still possible. A lot of people find great. I found a great relationship when I was in my early 40s, but it's harder. And to me, one of the line that I most think about this is going back to Thanos. When he's talking about all that he's lost, all that he's given up.
Yeah.
But particularly after he's had to sacrifice his own daughter in Gamora.
Chosen to.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. He was faced with a situation where in order to meet his goal, this was the necessary path, and he chose to pay that price rather than deciding the goal wasn't worth it.
Right.
But the fact that he frames it as I had to,
right, is
very telling.
Very common.
To me, it's that I think what he's dealing with is that he can't justify the loss to himself,
right?
And that the guilt that he feels like, and I get this. There's a sense of like, when I, there are times where like, I've spent a lot of time trying to build up podcasts, I'll be honest. And that time is time that I could have spent doing other things. And I as I've been pretty frank about, I've spent a lot of time evaluating what do I want to do with podcasts and how do I want to make it work. And I had to check myself because I found one of the thoughts that was in my head was, how many times have you had to say no to people to do something because you needed to go record something, because you needed to spend time editing when you could have been, going out to dinner or something like that? Are you going to feel guilty about all that if you decide, what, podcasts aren't working out? And I was able to get through that and realize like part of it's just the podcast landscape has changed and that I'm going to change, but also that I'm getting still a lot of positive benefit from it, even if it's not quite the follower numbers or the money numbers I would have wanted. But that thought is there, and I think it's there for Thanos. I think it's there for a lot of, in Star Trek especially, but I think also in MCU stuff, you think about Batman, I think about this a lot, where like our hero tries to kind of talk the villain down off the ledge, talk them away from the button.
Yeah.
And sometimes it works, but a lot of times when it doesn't, it's what they'll say is some version of like, I've paid too much. I've sacrificed too much. Yeah. I have to make it worthwhile. Yeah. And I think it's that thought of it. The fact is you can't get back that sunken cost. They feel guilty for having paid that cost. And they're hoping that if they can keep pushing through, if they win, it'll assuage the guilt. It'll make up for all the loss that's happened.
Yeah. I think Katra in She-Ra is a somewhat of a good example of this too. Yeah. I think she says something somewhere along the lines of like, well, I've already done these things, so like I can't,
I think Zuko does too. Doesn't he say that to Iroh at some point?
Yeah, I think so. I think so. Yeah. I mean, it's a very common villain. I've done the things I've done, and thus I need to follow through on my plan, because if I don't, then I'll just have done all those things for no reason. Right. And And yeah, I mean, you know, Thanos. um,
I mean, let's talk about Vader.
It just doesn't make any sense.
You
Yeah,
know,
okay, Vader.
I don't love Revenge of the Sith, in part because I think there's a lot it doesn't kind of make clear, but it
Yeah.
alludes to. But some of the novelizations that have happened since then, like, talk about Anakin realizing, like, once he basically helps Palpatine kill Mace, he has to justify that to himself,
Right,
you know?
right.
And that part of the rage that drives Vader so much is that he did give up so much in order to save his family, and it didn't work. You
Right,
know, his
yeah,
family
yeah.
died, and so now, you know, he that's the anger that drives him, and it's part of why he'll say at one point, you know, "It's too late for me, son." You
Yeah,
know, right
yeah.
before he takes him to the Emperor, because in his mind, all that sunk cost, the weight it places on him means that he can't go back.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. Of course, some of his family survived, obviously, and
Yeah.
it wasn't too late. Oh, it was too late for him to live, I guess, you know. But like, um, but
But no,
he, you
I mean,
know,
I think
he
part of his turn to the
earlier, yeah,
back to the good side
yeah,
is because of exactly that, because he realizes
for sure,
it may have been worth it.
for sure, for sure. And also, I mean, Mace isn't dead. I never saw a body. He fell. He fell in Star Wars. He's got to be fine. Come on.
Fair enough. Fair enough.
Maybe he didn't have enough dark side to sustain his, you know, his hate to sustain. I don't know, whatever. Anyway, uh,
Samuel L. Jackson's not doing much. He can get back into a
right?
Star Wars movie.
Yeah, yeah. What the thing I would say about the podcasting thing that you touched on though is like, I think that's a great example of where you look at the cost, right? Especially in
Right.
terms of time, right? I mean,
Right.
time has value. Time, like, there's nothing really more value than time in a lot of ways, right?
Yeah.
Um, and you can't get time back. But you know, you choose what to spend it on. And I think looking at it like, well, if you know, if I don't continue whatever podcast indefinitely, or I never reach the kind of levels of reach or financial success that I was hoping for, seeing that as a failure, I think is its own failure. And I don't mean
Mhm.
like I'll give an example. I've been listening to songs I recorded in like 2003 and I think 2011 and before then like 98 and like
Yeah.
none of these things ever reached a wide audience and
Yeah.
it's very unlikely they ever will. But at the time that felt like a failure and like it was commercially,
Yeah.
right? A failure. But that doesn't mean it was actually a failure. That doesn't mean that it was wasted time. Like when I think back, like I can still sit and listen to these things and enjoy them. There are
Yeah.
other people who listen to them at the time or at various points, you know, here and there and enjoy them. And, you know, to bring it back to the podcasting, you know, when you think about all the people that over the last decade have listened to the podcasts you've made and gotten something from it, whether it's enjoyment, whether it's thinking about something in a different way, whether it's feeling a sense of kind of community engagement when it's part of a podcast network, like that's real value that has that you've created with the time that you've spent. And so I think a lot of times, you know, it's like when we're looking at things in kind of a sunk cost way, it's like, yeah, well, the time is the sunk cost, but there's also value that's already been created, right? As opposed to like a hand of poker where it's like, well, if I don't win that pot, I didn't win the pot. Now, even though, yeah, go ahead.
I was going to add
pivoted
as
too
another
fast.
part of the value. I have said this jokingly, but there is some truth to it. When I go to see something with my wife, she likes to talk about it for about 10 minutes.
Oh, yeah,
I
yeah.
want to talk about it for many hours.
Right.
And she has said, you know, I'm really, like we would go see a movie and she'd be like, okay, you know what? I'm about ready for you to take those thoughts to your podcast. I
Nice.
just want to talk about it with someone.
Nice,
And
yeah.
she's like, I'm done with it. So, you know, I'm going to also chalk it up to mental health.
Yeah.
But no,
Yeah.
go ahead.
Oh, I just want to interject. I've also heard the words, can't you just talk about this with Matthew?
Yeah. And you're not the only podcast co-host I've had who has said exactly that
Yeah,
to me.
yeah.
So
Yeah, it's good to have
all the
an
marital
outlet.
health of all of my co-hosts. I'm glad.
Fantastic.
But I'll give another example, pulling it back to gambling as well. And I think this also goes into how we often don't look at what are all the costs, but also what are all the benefits, and how we can shift our idea of what the goal is.
Yeah.
Because today, the beyond the actual spending of money, the cost of playing poker in some form or another is very low.
Yeah.
You literally just walk to you need a computer, you need an internet connection, and it's literally just the time. In the past, though, when you and I first started playing,
Yep.
If we didn't want to go to, it might have been like taking a taxi to kind of a shady club where we didn't know what was going to happen, or it was, literally taking the time to travel to Atlantic City, which meant at that point, none of us had cars. We were New York City kids, going to the bus stop, getting on a bus, paying for the bus ticket, sitting on a
2.5 hour
bus, 2.5 hours, waiting in the bus station for 3 hours on the way back before a bus came, or however long it was. What I used to refer to as like the home of. There was one time where Paul, I, and I think our friend Adam all won a lot of money at poker. We all felt great. We walked into the bus station like 2 a.m, and it just felt like the home of broken dreams because everyone around us looked just so dejected and broken and sad.
And then you realize the last bus was 150, the next one's like 6:15, and you're like, no.
Oh, that's why. But so for example, I'm about to go to Vegas, and I'm going there for work, but I'm intentionally going there a day early because I want to spend some time playing poker. And there's an additional cost to that. I'm paying extra for the hotel room. I'm going to pay for the extra night of the hotel room. I'm going to pay a lot of money for, the meals that I have and all that kind of stuff. And when I used to go to Atlantic City, if I didn't have that winning session, I would feel very dejected because I'd feel like I wasted the weekend. I wasted all the time that I spent going to and from Atlantic City. I wasted the money on the bus ticket. I wasted all of that. But when I was able to say and this is a very important shift you have to do if you're going to try to be someone who gambles, is to be able to say to myself, wait a minute, what I actually did was I spent a certain amount of money to have a fun road trip with my friends.
Yeah.
And if someone says, let's hop in the car, we're going to drive 4 hours and pay $300 for concert tickets and another $100 for the hotel, and all in all spend $800 for a road trip where we go to have a couple of hours of entertainment, as long as you're not like paying the rent money, no one's going to question that.
Yeah.
If I say,
and no one's going to say, how much did you win?
Yeah, exactly. And so when I think about like gambling at something like Vegas, or like, I literally think of it in terms of how much money would I go to, if I went to Vegas to go see one of the shows, a concert, no one's going to say like, oh, you wasted all that money. I got an entertainment experience. I can have a lot of fun at a poker table, whether or not I'm winning or losing. But it's also the, when it isn't very fun to be trying desperately hard to win when you're down. So also being able to say, you know what, I'm $50 down, or I'm $500 down. I'm going to get up and go do something else. That's okay.
Yeah, for sure. And it can be a fun experience. Sitting there and trying to win whatever it is back, I think, is generally not a fun experience for most people.
Right.
Because that's how it's framed, right? It's like the goal, it becomes binary. You win it back or you don't win it back. Or like maybe it's like, well, I won some of it back. Fine. Right. As opposed to, you can be losing in a session and just be like, that's fine. That's like, that's not a big deal. Like you can still enjoy yourself if your mindset is either, I'm going to sit here and try and make plus EV decisions because that's what I do at the poker table, right? And in the long run, I'm going to make money, or I'm going to sit here and have fun, and the money in front of me is the maximum amount it's going to cost me, right? And I know sometimes I'm going to make money, sometimes I'm going to lose less than the maximum, but like, this is my budget for this mode of entertainment. And the not just necessarily enjoyment, but if we're talking about a strategy game, it can be any strategy game. A game you lose, like, there's still value in that, right? There's like, what have we learned? What can we take away from whatever happened in this game? Whether it's poker, whether it's chess, whether it's any other game.
Magic the Gathering, right?
That's what I was going to say, and then I wasn't, and then you said it, so good. Exactly. Like, what can be extracted? What value can we extract from this, in addition to any enjoyment, of the experience that we might have had?
Mm-hmm. No, totally with you.
Cool.
So why does this matter? Why is it important to think about the sunk cost fallacy?
I mean, just to avoid it, basically. It's
Mhm.
pretty simple. Like, don't throw good money after the bad, and evaluate each decision from the point of decision. Like,
Right.
that's really what it is. And it's, you can kind of ignore it if you're not that susceptible to it, right? But
Right.
like any other, I mean, really, it's a bias, right? It's a
Yeah.
bias towards continuing to invest in things that you've already invested in.
Right.
And so if you have that bias, then it's important to recognize it. And like most people do, and it's okay. And like you can accept that that's true and that's fine. That it's like, doesn't mean like you're a bad person. It just like means you're a person.
Yeah.
And when you recognize that bias, then it's something to consider when you're making your evaluation of the current circumstances, and be like, okay, am I evaluating the present decision based on its own merits, based on where I am right now, the current state of reality, as opposed to, am I allowing previous investments to color my perception of this situation the same way any other bias, right? Like,
Right.
maybe you have a bias against a particular group of people, and if you recognize that, you can be like, oh well, that's bad, I feel bad about that. Fine, I don't think it's great. But if you recognize that you have kind of an irrational bias, then you can adjust for it. Then when you have a negative perception of a person, you can be like, okay, is this negative perception based on something this person has done and that they're responsible for? Or is it just that they're part of a group that I have sort of some negative feeling towards, that like is unresolved, and I accept that that's part of me, but so I'm not going to allow my biases to affect how I treat this person,
Right.
right? And because I mean, everybody has some sorts of biases one way or another, right? And being
I
able
can't
to,
stand people who say that.
mm,
That.
yeah.
Go ahead.
um I mean, I find it irksome when people say that everybody has any given bias. I don't think that's
Yeah.
true. But I think like it's just about universal to have some sort of,
Right.
just, we have our own experiences, right?
Yeah.
And we're also existing in a world where certain things are telling us things, and we can go along with what people are telling them, or we can react against it, or
Right.
sometimes we can have a fairly unbiased take look at things. But just being able to identify those in ourselves and in others sometimes, I think can allow us to like just remember to like, okay, let me double check this situation,
Right.
right? Like any kind of sunk cost type thing, it's going to be like, okay, anything where you've invested in a lot, just double check. Like, am I assigning a bunch of emotional weight to the fact that I've already invested in this situation? Or am I looking at it,
Yeah.
clean, essentially?
And I think that evaluation is the key
Mhm.
because, as I said before, I do think there are situations where it looks a lot like a sunk cost, but they're actually part of, I think, the idea of the sunk cost is that you can't get it back, and there is no further loss that will occur by recognizing it's a sunk cost and not trying to win it. But like, let me give you a different example. You know, your boss asks you to do something in a certain way. You pick one particular way to do it, and you start to think this might have a very small chance of succeeding, but you're worried that if you try to stop now and do something else, you're not sure you can anymore. If what you're worried about is people laughing at you in the break room, being like, haha, see, we all told you it was stupid to try to make new Coke. Look at you recognizing that we were all right. Yeah, there's an emotional factor there. That's gonna suck, but whatever. Do the right thing. If you're pretty clear that your boss is an idiot, and if you admit that you were wrong, and you know, if you realize,
I'm as lost as you are right
no,
now.
no, I know what I'm trying to
Okay.
say. Let me just
Okay.
say, if you realize though that your boss actually is unfortunately very results focused,
Mm.
and if you come back to him and say, "Hey, I tried this thing, it didn't work out. I'm going to try something else," the boss is going to fire you. And if eventually they realize that your thing that you tried didn't work, the boss is going to fire you. Well, you might as well keep trying the thing that has barely any chance to succeed, because that's your only hope in that situation. Or to quit. That's not a perfect example by any means, but my point just being, there is sometimes a cost a literal and actual cost to beyond the emotional to saying, I was wrong, I'm going to do something else. Maybe actually a better example is what I was thinking of in what you were saying before. If it's just your own bias and you figure it out, yeah, please change for the love of God. I think we see pretty clearly that when public figures who've had an admitted bias now acknowledge, wait, I was wrong, I shouldn't have done that. I don't think this is good for it to happen, but often what will be is like the people who are on their side who still like their bias are going to reject them.
Yeah.
And a lot of times the people who they're now kind of trying to go over to are going to be like, fuck you. You were rejecting us this whole time. We don't want you now.
Yeah, I think that's a real problem, in the world, for sure. For sure.
100%.
People need to be allowed to change.
Yeah. And I think lots of people, and this is true of, I certainly actually, I'm having trouble thinking of an exact example, but I can think of many times where Zuko actually, I know, definitely does this, as does Shira, even more specifically, where it's like the hero's like, you can come join us, it's okay.
Yeah.
And the response is, no, your people are never going to trust me. They're never going to forgive me. They're never going to be okay.
Yeah.
And
Zuko is kind of the opposite, where he tries to join them, and then they're like, we don't trust you. And he's like, how about I'll burn your feet by accident? Oh yeah, that helps.
Yeah. Instead, everyone just goes on life-changing adventures with Zuko, except Toph, and maybe that's why she winds up a cop. I don't know. So it's Zuko's fault. Okay, we're lost on many tangents. But yeah, my point is just that, like, there shouldn't be, and I don't think it should stop people from stopping to be doing something terrible, especially. But sometimes there is a cost involved in recognizing that you are actually not successful in something. And so yeah, just that's part of it is working through that and figuring out what is a actual sunken cost, what is a cost that is either recoverable or where there is a real, potential loss of, doing something else.
Yeah, I mean, and that, to me, that just still comes down to basically, I mean, that's a subset of evaluate the situation without whatever biases, right? And the fact that you've invested in something doesn't mean you shouldn't continue to invest in it. And also decisions are choices between multiple options, right? And in the boss example that you gave, like, one of the options was like definite or very likely failure, and the other one was like moderately likely failure. And it's like, oh well, moderate's better than definite or very likely.
Yeah, right? Exactly.
So sometimes it's a choice between multiple not very good options. The nice thing in poker is, like, folding is always 0 EV. Like, you can always just be like, nope, but kind of there's sort of some stuff there too. But yeah, it's what are the actual options, and what is the spread of outcomes and the likelihood of the various different outcomes. And that's a whole other conversation, like how to actually evaluate things, how to weigh best outcomes against, like, good outcomes, against moderate neutral outcomes, against bad outcomes, and the likelihood of different ones. And people have biases when it comes to these as well,
very much so.
Like,
and a lot of it's also that, like, in poker, like I said, in poker, there's a very specific cost that is numerically evaluated in terms of, like, the money that you're betting and the money you're winning back. But also the cost of, time is very different to different people, depending on your life circumstances. The cost of travel, of, I think one thing I did not recognize as early as I should have, and I have apologized to you before and apologize again. For me, traveling to Atlantic City had a food bonus because there was fun food I could get in Atlantic City. For a vegan whose choices, especially back then, were much more limited, going to a place where literally there was almost nothing you could eat, the food's much more of a cost than it is part of the cost rather than part of the benefit.
The lack thereof is the cost, for sure. Hooters was not my favorite place. It's like, I guess I'll get the side salad.
I love the chicken wings, but there was not much there. I wish someone would rebrand it, like give the waitresses real outfits, and because I don't care about that. I just love their chicken. Anyway, this is not the right discussion.
I think there's other places for that, but also, I'd be fine if they got rid of all the all the chicken places.
Yeah, that's you're not the right answer. You're not the right location.
like Chick-fil-A, I'm like, yeah, I don't need to boycott them. Like,
Yeah.
I already would prefer they didn't exist. So, like,
if I tell you that I'm letting McDonald's kill living creatures instead of gay people, homophobic people kill living creatures,
right,
not much of a difference.
Like, cool.
Yeah. Okay, we are so far off the topic here.
Yeah.
But I'll just say, actually, that's another example that I've heard from folks is, I remember talking to somebody about that. He was talking to me about his teenage daughter who's a vegan and how she's always pressuring him to stop eating meat.
Yeah.
And that he just he's invested so much in arguing about it with her
sure,
that he just he feels like giving up now would just, she's going to hold it over his head for the rest of his life.
Right.
And
lovely.
Yeah. That's a terrible reason to do something if you don't think it's right.
Yeah.
Anyway, last comments you want to make about sunk cost fallacy?
Don't throw good money after the bad.
Yeah.
And don't just keep killing more people or chickens because you've killed people and chickens in the past. Like, you can let go of your villainous schemes, whatever they may be.
Obviously, I was making reference to Trump and Iran, and I definitely think there's a sunk cost fallacy there. Although in his mind, it's probably some level of that the real cost of in his mind, if he wins this war, maybe he does better at the elections. And if he acknowledges what everyone else knows, then he loses the elections. But, I think when you brought up Vietnam, we know from the Pentagon Papers, people have said we don't think we're going to win, but the public won't accept for us to say we were wrong to go in after this many. And so
right.
I think it was John Kerry who said, who wants to be the last person to die for a mistake? But that was exactly what the American government did, is that they spent years and years trying to, we brokered a peace deal that made it look like it was a tie in Vietnam.
Right.
Everyone knew the North Vietnamese were going to conquer the rest of the country, which was the exact thing we're trying to stop within 3 years, which they did. But it was that it's the sunk cost fallacy of we spent all these lives, we can't admit we were wrong.
Yeah.
So yeah, don't do that. That's dumb.
Yeah, don't. Yeah, just don't with the wars. And I mean, the sunk cost fallacy is that's a bad reason for perpetuating a war. For continuing it. But the inciting incident is also that's maybe that's a topic for another day.
Now, I mean, there's certainly a lot of arguments that part of World War I getting started is all this money that was sunk into these military, especially into the British and German navies, and a sense of well, all those people who had these ridiculous idea that we should have bought bread and bullshit like that,
right.
Gotta use them. We gotta prove it's right. All right.
Yeah.
This has been awesome. We've talked a lot about dumb ways that people can spend their money and all these sunk costs. But I think a cost that will provide great value is buying a book. There are lots of books you could buy, but there's one in particular that I think is a pretty damn good value. Paul, what would that be?
Zen Madman's Friday Night is My Monday Morning. Volume 1 is a collection of my newsletter entries following my journey attempting to win a house in 1,001 days. So that's subtitled Betting the House on Poker. But it's a multi-year journey. So this is, the first 100 pages of the Odyssey, although actually it's 256 pages. Yeah. And you can find it at zenmadman.com, but there is a link and actually I think right now you have to type in www.zenmadman.com or something goes weird. So that's very annoying, but you can save yourself the trouble by clicking a link in the show description, which will there's an affiliate link. So some of the proceeds will go to the podcast, and you'll also get 40% off by using code SHE400.
Yes. So please do that. It helps the podcast. It helps Paul. And to be very clear, disclaimer, as Paul said, this is only volume 1. So we are not guaranteeing that if you read this book, you will win a house. You have to buy all the volumes, at which point we're guaranteeing, Paul is guaranteeing, not me, of course, but that you will win a house. I'm kidding, to be very clear for anyone who's listening. But
no houses were guaranteed in the making of this podcast.
Please check that out. Please also, we recently had Pete Wright talking about his book, Lattice, and also we'll have him on again soon talking about his newer book, Onset. links to be able to purchase those are in the show notes as well. So please take a look at all those awesome things being done by True Story and Superhero Ethics hosts and guests. Authors, please check out my other podcast, Star Wars Generations podcast, where by the time this comes out, we will have talked about The Ninth Jedi, the anime Star Wars TV show that's coming out that a lot of us are super excited for. And most importantly, may the Force be with you when you gamble.
May the Force be with you.
May the Force be with you.